turn that on. That'll be helpful. All right, so like Alfred said, I'm going to be talking about full imprinting, but more specifically, I'm going to give you my own personal backstory with it. So where I grew up was specifically mostly on a horse farm in Calabasas, California. This was my backyard and where I learned quite a bit of my horse knowledge. More specifically, the people that I learned from were my grandfather. Back in his day, he was a farm manager for a horse thoroughbred farm, and at the time, the veterinarian taught him quite a bit of veterinary medicine in the event that there was an emergency or just something that came up with the horses. My grandfather could just go ahead and treat in case the vet wasn't available. So because he gained all that knowledge, he passed it on to his son, who's my father. And then when I was born, I spent a lot of time with my dad, so he taught me. When I was little, he started giving me little responsibilities, go turn on the hose, shut the gate, get a can of grain type thing. But as I grew older, he gave me more and more responsibilities. And when I got to the point when I was old enough, he let me work with the foals. So this is just an image. I think I was in middle school or something around that age, and this is a newborn foal. And with imprinting, in my own experience, I'm not like a horse trainer or anything like that, so take it with a grain of salt. What we want to do, our goal is to expose these foals to human touch so that they can learn to trust us and they become desensitized to that feeling. So that when they are older and we want to teach them how to work, they're not frightened just because we put our hand on their head or put a saddle on their back. So my own personal story that I used imprinting was with my horse, Spirit. He was born when I was in middle school, and my parents had decided that it didn't matter whether or not it was a school night, that I would be there for when he was born and begin the imprinting process. So right when a foal is born, we will have a towel and we rub along the rib cage, and it can stimulate breathing. And it also, horses can get a bit ticklish around the rib cage area, and that's where in the future we're going to be using a girth. So we want to make sure that we're eliminating that kind of stimulus. Not only so there I'm rubbing along the rib cage, but another thing that we'll do is that we'll rub down their nose and we'll get rid of fluid, and that's for medical purposes so that they don't aspirate. But again, it is exposing them to being touched around their face. Everything that they're exposed to after they're born is something new. So if we teach them from when they're born, then they hopefully will have a positive experience with it and won't associate it as a scary thing. This is the day after. Imprinting doesn't require hugging, but since he was my horse, I was going to hug him. The point of it, though, is to make sure that you're touching all over their body, around their head, their ears, their neck, especially underneath the abdomen, again, for that girth, all along their back, within their tail, up and down their legs. You can pick up their legs so that they're used to that, especially when we want to eventually clean their hooves. And then eventually, when they're a bit older, you're going to want to be able to ignore my very poor EBS lead rope holding. A horse needs to know how to be led. They're not born with that knowledge, so you have to teach them. Because I had already been touching him around his head when I put the halter on, while it was different, and yes, it could have been scary, his reaction was not as bad. Leading is another thing that is really important with our horses. We want to make sure that they know to trust us, and it's not necessarily natural for them. But since Spirit, he was able to trust me, he knew that he could follow me. Of course, this doesn't happen all the time. There were days when he was very compliant, and there were days when he didn't want to budge. It's something that you just have to work with the horses. But again, the more that you expose them and train them, and just keep desensitizing them, the easier the training process will be once they're older. So past the imprinting process was the training. So eventually, of course, your horses are going to need to be able to be saddled and worked with more intensively. So this is just a very light saddle pad. It's not an actual saddle. The purpose of this is to get him used to being pulled in his mouth, so that when he does have a rider eventually using the reins, he will know that, okay, if I feel pressure on the right side, I know to turn to the right, versus vice versa, pull on the left, I know to turn left. Or if I'm pulled both, to stop or reverse. All those things are things that are going to be needed for the future. And again, it stems from because he was used to me training with him with new stimulus or just having touched him and whatnot. He was used to that and trusted me, and he knew that it was just a part of the training process. So that eventually when I was able to get a saddle on him and start riding him, it was not he didn't try to buck or all that stuff, because he was used to those weights and that feeling. So eventually, once we were past all the training, we were really close. So I pretty much was the only rider that he was exposed to for his life. And so here, my dad would go and visit him, and he'd tell me like, oh, it's almost like I wasn't even there. He wouldn't even lift his head for anything. But if I go there and I call to him, he'll like run over to me. And that's the type of like relationship you could potentially build from starting at day one with this imprinting. It may or may not happen with every horse, and it's not to say that just because you weren't the one who imprinted doesn't mean that a horse won't like bond to you. It's just, this is how I started with him, and he pretty much got really, really close to me. And now, currently, he's living with my sister-in-law, and she texts me on how my nephews are able to ride him, and he's like he was never really exposed to kids prior, but because I had exposed him to a variety of stimuli, he doesn't react negatively. And that is my experience with imprinting. So, thank you.